Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Woo! We're so excited to be here with you on this panel. My name is Carla Arenas Valenti, and I will be moderating Middle Grade and Marvelous Characters Who Will Steal Your Heart. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Special thanks to the event committee for all of their hard work planning all of these events, making sure that your favorite storytellers are able to talk to you for free and virtually, and it's been a wonderful experience. Special thanks as well to all of the sponsors that you saw at the beginning of this reel. And one quick note before we get started, please be sure you read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. And now, without further ado, let us get started. My name, as I said, is Carla Arenas Valenti. I am the creator of the My Super Science picture book series and the author of Loteria, a middle grade magical realist adventure that explores the question of whether we have free will or if everything in our life is predetermined. The story takes place in my home country of Mexico, as life and death come into Oaxaca City to play their annual game of Loteria. For those of you who don't know, Loteria is a little bit like bingo, except instead of numbers, you have images on all of your boards. And you have a deck of cards that has the same images on them. So life and death come into town to play this game of Loteria, and they choose a pawn, a girl named Clara, who will be the recipient of a long life if life wins the game, or a swift death if death wins the game. But Clara knows none of this. And as it turns out, as life and death play their game and flip their cards, every one of these cards unfolds as an event in Clara's life, forcing her to make choices leading to what seems like an inevitable destiny, or maybe not. The story ends with a twist that surprised me, that surprised life and death, and that will hopefully surprise you guys if you do read the book. So hopefully you'll read it and you'll enjoy it. And now I would like to invite my fellow panelists to please tell us a little bit about themselves and their wonderful books that they will be talking about today. So I will let you, why don't we start with Laura?
Okay. I'm Laura Ojeda Melchor. This is my son, Abel. And I wrote this book, Missing Oakley, which is about a Cuban-American girl, well, two Cuban-American sisters growing up in Montana, and something bad happens during their annual tradition to cross the river in front of their house. And Phoebe, the main character, loses not only her sister, but also her singing voice, and singing is her favorite thing to do. So it's about that.
What about you, Alejandra? Tell us about your book.
Well, hi, my name is Alejandra Algorta. I wrote this book called Never Forgotten. I originally wrote it in Spanish, and it was translated by the poet Aida Salazar, which I'm very happy about. It's a story about a boy who forgot how to ride his bicycle and gets really depressed about it and starts doubting everything he has been told about life, because you can't forget. You are not able. Well, they tell you that you can forget how to ride a bike. So yeah, that's what it's about.
And the books so far, Oakley and Never Forgotten, are just stunning. They're beautiful, beautiful books, and I'm so grateful that you wrote those. Cristina, tell us about your beautiful book.
So, hello, I am Cristina Diaz Gonzalez, the author of several books, right over there. A few of them historical fiction, such as The Red Umbrella, Thunderous Whisper, and action adventures, stories like Moving Target and Return Fire. And then my newest one, poster's right there, book is right here. Concealed is the story of a young girl who believes she is in the witness protection program. And she believes this because this is what her parents have been telling her is the reason they have been constantly moving, changing their identities, how they look, their names, their backstories, and there's a government agent that comes and brings them their new documents. The only thing she has control over is her first name. She gets to choose her first name, and so she's going through the alphabet. She started with A, Ana, then Beatriz, then Carla. She's now Joanna, and soon she will be picking a name with the letter K. And she's living this life of lies only to soon discover that it's her parents who are telling her the biggest lie of all, because they're not actually in the witness protection program. Not a big spoiler yet. They're not in the witness protection program, but there's another life-altering reason why she's constantly having to be on the run. And that is a spoiler. So I won't get too much into all the twists and turns, but that's my new book, Concealed.
And it's an excellent, very unpredictable twist. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Alex, you have 2 books. Your latest is number 2, but why don't you tell us a little bit about both?
Sure. Hi, I'm Alex Astor. I'm the author of the Emblem Island series, which takes place on magical Emblem Island, where everyone is born with markings on their skin that represent their fate and their talents. So everyone is born with a rainbow lifeline across their palm, and it shows how long their life will be, if it'll be a hard life, if it'll be a short life or an easy life. And the main character, Tor Luna, hates his boring lifeline, and he also hates his emblem, which is his role in society. So he's meant to be the leader of his village, but he doesn't want to lead anyone. So during the annual New Year's Eve celebration, where he can make a wish in hopes that it's granted in the new year, he wishes for a different emblem. But instead of his wish coming true the next morning, he has been cursed, his lifeline has been shortened, and the only way to stop his untimely death is if he finds the Night Witch, which he only knows through legends. So that was the plot of the first book, and then the second book just came out this year, and it's called Emblem Island Curse of the Forgotten City, and it's all about a sea adventure. So whereas the first book, you get to see all the different cultures and the magic system of Emblem Island, in the second book, it's all about pirate legends and sirens and sea monsters around Emblem Island.
That's awesome. Thank you. Your books are excellent. And to all of our viewers, a great way to support all of the storytellers that are participating in this festival is to request their books in the library, buy them, share how exciting these books are with all of your friends, write letters to the storytellers, let them know that you read their books and that you love them. That means everything to us. So a couple questions for my friend panelists here. Good characters, and all of your books had great characters, but they always have flaws. And that's, in fact, one of the things that makes characters so relatable. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your character's flaw and how they realize this is their flaw, what they do about it?
Yeah, I think I'm supposed to go first for this one. My main character, Tor Luna, his biggest flaw at the beginning of the book is that he doesn't really realize the gifts that he has. He's a little bit ungrateful. All he can focus on is what he doesn't have instead of focusing on what he does have, which is a loving family and an amazing community. And so he really realizes throughout the journey how much he has neglected in his life and how lucky he is compared to some of his friends and some of the people he encounters in different parts of Emblem Island. And so the main message, I think, for him is be careful what you wish for, and also that you always think that you have less than you actually have. And so that's his main flaw in the beginning, and something that he definitely learned throughout his journey.
Alejandra, why don't you tell us about your character's flaw?
My character's flaw, being a 8-year-old male, cis male, his biggest flaw could be arrogance, or his most human trait could be arrogance, because he believes he's the king of the world, basically. And what happens to him is what happens to all of us, that he falls, and when he falls, he realizes that his arrogance was built on the fact that he could ride a bike. And he can't ride a bike anymore because he forgets. And the worst thing that could happen to him has happened to him, because the things that he most loved, he can't do anymore. So that's the flaw, and that's like the twist that carries him to his depression.
Well, and what I loved about how you set this up is that that flaw, and actually his arrogance, is such a big part of his identity. And so when he loses the ability to do this thing that defines him, it's almost like an identity crisis that he has, which I guess is the same with all of your characters. And Alex, it's the same in your stories. Their flaw is a part of who they are. And so to resent that part is in a way to resent themselves. So I thought that was very interesting. Christina, what do you think about this?
And I completely agree. And it's almost like, I think it's a continuing theme, you know, the arrogance, a little bit of being the self-centered. And I think it's also the time of life that we're writing for and that we're writing in. And it's almost like a little bit of a tunnel vision, which is what I see one of the big flaws of my character, who by chapter 2, I'm just going to call her Katrina, because the rest of the book, she's called Katrina. So except for chapter 1, she's Joanna. Then she becomes Katrina. So Katrina is so hyper-focused on finding out the truth and wanting to know, you know, the secrets that have been kept from her, that she loses sight of the damage she might be doing to others around her. In pursuing these secrets and and part of it is that she's never really experienced true friendship. And now she does, but she doesn't know how to navigate that at the beginning. And she's just completely focused on what she wants until, you know, the evolution of the character, you know, she starts understanding that there's more at stake than just herself. You know, there are others that she has to look out for as well. So, and I have a feeling that, you know, that's, again, a running theme, which is one of the reasons I love middle grade so much. I think Laura probably has something similar.
Yeah, so my middle grade character has a pretty obvious flaw. She lies, like a really huge lie. And for a lot of the book, she tries to stay on top of her lie. But when a rumor starts circulating that she knows more about what happened, she's forced to like face it head on. So, sorry. So she, with a little bit of help from her side characters, she kind of has to open that narrow vision, which... Yeah, we're going to the trampoline park after this. So, yeah, so she's very, you know, focused on herself and on making sure that her parents don't find out that what happened was partly her fault. And she's just like at all costs trying to avoid that. So yeah, okay.
So, Christina, you actually brought up wanting to know the truth, and that actually segues into my next question. So I'm going to put this one to you. Stories, in a way, are always about a truth and a lie. A character starts off believing something about themselves, their goal, their obstacles, the world around them. And this belief, however, is misguided and tends to lead them astray. So the story, in a way, is the character's journey towards this truth. So what is your character's lie, and how does that lead them astray? Or how do they eventually get on the right path to find their truth?
I mean, it's interesting because my story and my character, it's all predicated on lies. Her entire life is built upon telling lies, lies about who she is, where she's from, what her parents do, where she's going next. You know, her whole thing is to blend in and be easily forgotten once she's gone. And I think living that life of lies becomes a lie in itself. And it's that trying on almost different aliases, different identities, mirrors a lot of real life, because in middle school, you're still trying to discover who you are. You're starting to figure it out, but you can have a different persona. You can all of a sudden want to be, someone else. You want to be perceived as someone else, which is Katrina's goal, is, how she's perceived. But the lies are also starting to affect who she believes she is. And so that's the biggest internal lie, is that she's gotten to the point that she doesn't know who she is inside. And it's that conflict that really motivates her. And again, it blends into real life, because that's the discovery during the younger years. You're really trying to figure out who you are and who you want to be. So I think that's how lies come in. And I can't get it too much into details about the lies, because there's a lot of twists in the book. So it's very difficult to find line. I have to
yes,
walk
there. Yes. Alex, what about you?
So I think the lie definitely that Tor believes is that if only he was born with the right emblem, if only his wish would come true, he would be happy. Which I think is a pretty relatable thing. I think, like, especially when we're younger, we think if only this could happen, like everything would be okay. But the lesson really is that he has to be happy with himself before, and that there are outside things like his family or his friends that are just going to be way more important than things like his emblem. And so I definitely think that that's the lie, that he truly believes that if he gets this wish, he'll be happy and everything will be okay. And that's not true. And you really see that at the end of the book. And so I think that that's definitely the lie. And his entire journey to find the Night Witch is his journey to the truth, because he eventually will find the truth. And it's kind of seeing his reaction to it, or seeing what happens after you find the truth, after believing this lie, kind of shows how much of a lie it was in the beginning.
One thing that I really enjoyed about how you got us to that point with him is that in the end, his truth is not what he expected. And even though it's still a truth, I think you did a great job of being authentic. One of the pitfalls, I think, of the lie truth dichotomy is that then in the end, the truth ends up being what they wanted in the beginning. They just didn't realize it. And here it isn't. He ends up getting something completely different, but also it comes back full circle. And I really appreciated that, because I think that is the way reality is, right? We set off on this journey, and the truth we uncover was there all along, but it wasn't necessarily the one we thought we were looking for. So I appreciated how you set that up. It was really, really well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So my main character's belief about herself is that she isn't good enough, and that her parents loved her sister more than they loved her, and that she'll never measure up. And her sister is like the perfect child for her parents, where the main character is a little more difficult, requires a little bit more attention, and isn't as easy. And this is partly what drives her to lie about her sister's death, is that she just believes that if her parents know that they will not love her, or they'll abandon her. And I think that in life we make choices based on these types of understandings all the time, in our friendships, in our families, and we assume that someone feels a certain way about us and we react accordingly, only to later find out that they felt an entirely different way. And basically we see the world through our own lens, and sometimes this narrow vision can get us into trouble.
Yeah. So your story broke my heart. It was so visceral. It was so visceral and raw, and it's such a fragile emotion that you were dealing with. So hats off for how you handled that, because to be able to capture the very real pain of feeling unloved, I mean, that is the core of everything, right? And so you're right. That is what prompts her into this lie. But that narrative could be so superficial, so pithy, and just not really digging deep enough. But you managed to do that. You managed to really get us to that point where it felt so true and so authentic that you believe this is the only way she can handle this is with this lie, because it will break her. So yeah, completely. Yeah. Alejandra, what about you?
Like that is told to Fabio, my character, and that perhaps is told to all of us, is that riding a bike is never forgotten, as the title of the book, Never Forgotten. Once he forgets how to ride his bicycle, his belief system breaks down, much like the characters we're talking about. Like Laura's character, he believes he thought he deserved love because he could ride a bike like the greatest bicycle rider. And like Christina's character, he starts to think that everything is a lie. And yeah, he begins to distrust the world and finds an ally in his elderly neighbor. And she tells him that the sea does not exist, and together they feel that they can unravel all the lies of the world. In my opinion, the end of the book shows us that there is not really black and white. There's just a great truth that is death and life. And in between of those things, there are nuances and feelings and emotions and also mistakes and poetry and ways in which we try to tell ourselves and each other things so we can make life more bearable.
I loved how your book had all the artwork as well. So in addition to all of these things, the illustrations played a pretty important role in getting us to that conclusion, especially at the end, how you had the artwork bookending the beginning and the end of the story. That was really well done to tie that narrative together. So let me move on to a slightly more technical question about the craft of storytelling. So describe a specific challenge that you encountered in writing your book and how you worked around it or how you resolved it. So I'll put a little example out there for Loteria, because one of the things I was trying to do with Loteria was to write an adventure, but also to have a philosophical debate where life and death are discussing free will versus predeterminism. So I built up all these arguments. Life believes in free will, death believes in predeterminism. And so as the story goes on, they debate this. And a challenge I encountered was that I actually argued myself and them into a conundrum that coincided with the story climax, where I didn't actually know how they were going to resolve the debate. And so I ended up sort of stuck at this point, and I couldn't really move the story forward. And it also stuck my character, Clara, at her climax that she could not resolve because of this whole kind of mess. And ironically, given the theme of the book, the way that I worked my way out of it was that I let go of Clara. In my mind as the author, I thought I knew the fate I wanted for her. And in the end, I had to give her free will to tell the story as she wanted to tell it. And that's when she came up with a solution that I had not expected or predicted or anticipated in any way. But it was both a solution to the conundrum of free will versus fate and a solution to her plot problem. So in my case, that was the way out. But I'd love to put that out to all of you and see what was a specific challenge you encountered in your storytelling.
So one that I encountered was, originally the story was very focused on Phoebe's grief. And since Oakley's death happened so early in the novel, it's not even a spoiler, it's so early. The character originally didn't really have a goal for pages and pages except to deal with her grief, which really doesn't have a resolution. Grief stays with you forever. But the reality is that we all have dreams and goals too. And despite our traumas and the things that happen in our lives and our losses, we still deserve to have those dreams and goals. So with the help of my literary agent, who was really great at doing editorial work with me on this book, I dug into Phoebe's dream and goal of being a professional singer. And then when she is sad, she realized really that she loses her singing voice. She just can't do it because of the grief and trauma that she's been through. So now she's not only grieving the loss of her sister, but she's also trying to figure out how to cling to her dream. And it's one that her sister supported her in, and she wants to sing for her sister. So I'm just grateful to my agent for helping me dig into that and get through the difficult realization that I had to cut a lot of the book and rewrite it to reflect Phoebe's pursuit of her goals in the middle of her grief.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear both of you talk about how you're crafting the book. And I know that as writers, we often fall into like two broad general categories: the plotters who outline and, you know, have these exquisite, like color-coded boards with like postcards and everything is laid out. And then there's the other camp, which I'm a part of, which is the pantsers who write by the seat of their pants. We have no idea what we're doing half the time. And so for me, I usually know my ending. I do know how I envision the book ending, because usually that's one of the very first things I think of is the ending of the story. Then I have to go back, figure out my beginning, and then the ending's my North Star, and I'm just writing towards it. I don't know what will happen next. And because I love writing books that have a lot of twists and turns and unexpected moments and, you know, things that will catch the reader completely by surprise, you know, and keep them on the edge of their seat, I can sometimes twist myself up into like a pretzel. Like I don't know exactly. I've done so many twists that I don't even know where I am. And I have to kind of refocus on that North Star of my ending. Am I moving the story forward? Yeah, you can do a twist and a double twist and a triple twist. And now you're not even sure who's saying what to who and who's lying and who's not. And I just have to kind of streamline that. And so I have like dual personas as I'm writing. I think of myself, because I don't have a complete roadmap as to what I'm supposed to be writing, I'm the reader, the very first reader as I'm writing. And so I'm guessing as the reader, because that's just who I am. I guess what's going to happen next. Like I'm the person at the movie who's like, oh, that's the bad guy. So I'm trying to guess what's going to happen next. And then the writer side of my brain is trying to stay one step ahead and not be so predictable. And yet at the same time, when the big twists come, I always like for the reader to be able to go back and see that the clues were always there.
Yeah,
that they were just overlooked. So that's I think my biggest challenge, and the workaround is just keeping that reader and writer hat kind of flipping on and off all the time.
That's really interesting to me because I'm actually a plotter. I have all the post-its on the wall. I know exactly what's gonna happen and what's gonna happen in the end and how it's gonna happen. And I think the hardest part for me is how I'm gonna like the language. So I had a really hard time describing the city in which I have lived all my life, which sounds ridiculous, but I felt like it was too big to be described, or too dynamic, or too changeable, and I wanted to do some kind of justice to it, and I wanted to see it in its entirety, and I wanted to be the Bogota of all Bogota citizens. I believe now that is and was impossible. But my editor actually helped me a lot in the process of accepting that Bogota could in fact be described. And it ended up being like a great protagonist of the book, the city. And because it could be like the key that she gave me is that it could be observed from my character's point of view. And that would bring justice to him and to Bogota, because that's all we have, like points of view. And in my experience, Fabio's gaze showed a city that many people lived every day in Bogota, and it ended up going well. But I really, really struggled with that.
I love that you frame Bogota as a character in its own right. That's very interesting and absolutely. I mean, Bogota comes through as vibrantly as all of your other characters. That's really, really cool. Very clever. Yeah.
I think that I had different challenges for my first book, and my second book. The first book, I didn't have an outline. I had never outlined before. So they're both quest narratives. So you kind of know, like, okay, like you start somewhere, you go a bunch of places, and then you end somewhere. And I knew the ending and I knew the beginning, but I really was kind of like, where are we going next? Like, like a lot of like adventure myself. I had no idea what was going to happen. But then the second book, because it was contracted, I had to have like a very specific outline like a year before I was going to write it. So I knew what was going to happen, which made it easier, but also harder because it's harder for me. Like in the first book, it was easier for me to describe the places because I was just kind of imagining it along with the character. And I think that the balance between like having a fast-paced plot and having like a fantastical world that you describe is like it's always difficult for me because I want to take the time to like really engulf like the reader in like this fantastical world, but you also don't want to slow down the plot so much. And so that was, I think, more difficult in the second book because I knew what was going to happen, so there wasn't that sense of like wonder, surprise. But it was, I always like underwrite. So I always have like a way shorter manuscript that I need. And so then going back and trying to bulk it up and adding places is always a challenge because for me, I always feel like, oh, well, that's what it is. And then you have to go back. So I think those are my issues, were my problems. And I solved that, just my editor helped me find places where I could like bulk it up and then add different scenes. But I'm working right now on edits. I have a young adult series coming out next year, and that's very different. I had a very, very specific outline. And so I think every mode of writing comes with its own challenges. And that's kind of the fun part, because if it was like super easy, it wouldn't be as interesting as it is. But yeah, I definitely think that my challenges come in the space between having an outline and not having an outline and just seeing how you're going to put the pieces together.
So I guess on a related note, it sounds like to varying degrees, people sort of knew how the story would end. We kind of knew how the story would begin, but there's also this transformative moment that each of the characters goes through. Did you know that moment when you started writing, or did that come about more organically as the story was told? Right, whether we call it the resolution or whatever, it's that moment where the character has to confront their big truth and transform. Alejandra, what about you?
I knew from the beginning that the big truth was going to be our big truth, that is death, and that was going to be the point that gave all the characters perspective, the great inevitability, the great truth of our mortality, because death fundamentally seems like a lie. It's just incredible. More so for an 8-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So the hardest thing to write, I think, was the scene of like when he confronts death. Because I remember feeling for years and years like I was killing a character without it dying, because I couldn't write it properly. I couldn't find the perfect description of the void or the absence left behind. It was torture, but it ended up being okay, and I'm in peace with it now. But that was my big truth.
Yeah, so mine also, I don't want to give like too much away, but I will say that I always knew that the resolution would be what the resolution is, although the path there shifted as the novel went through revisions. And I, kind of going back, I did not plot this novel at all, and I am plotting my next one, but it's totally different thing. But just, I always knew what I wanted the ending to be. And I really love Phoebe's ultimate transformation, because I think it strips away a bit of that narrow vision and makes her see herself and others through a more empathetic lens. One thing is that originally the ending was going to be a little bit less hopeful than it is, because the resolution occurs just a few weeks after the traumatic incident. It hasn't been, a year, and it's very fresh still. But my editor kind of helped me realize that after such a heavy book, readers might need a little bit of hope to hold on to. So, yeah.
Yeah. I also probably shouldn't say like the transformative part, because it would be a spoiler, but I believe I always knew. It's kind of tough because I'm sure all of us, like, we wrote these books years ago, even if they're just being published now. So it's kind of, some of it kind of blurs together, but I believe I always knew, but there are definitely things about the characters and their transformations and stuff that when I'm writing it, you realize, oh, this character has to grow, or this character is not the same character that I began writing. They have a deeper meaning, or they have something more that they are designed to say. And so I definitely think that some things change in terms of like the transformation and like what it meant for the main character, and the stakes definitely got a lot higher as I was editing it. But I think I did start knowing it, because I think with most quests and most stories that have one, like, where the transformation is like the big part of the story, it's all leading up to there. So I don't think I would have been able to write like everything else if I hadn't known. But yeah.
For me, I knew, again, without giving away one of the big spoilers, I knew that one of the transformative moments was going to happen. I had already envisioned that. I wasn't really aware of the details surrounding, because there are other secrets revealed, along with the one thing that she wants to know is, who is my family really? Like, who are we? Who am I? Where did I come from? What's my real name? It's the basics. And as she starts peeling back the layers of all these lies that have been told, the secrets that revealed just become so monumental to her, that I knew that would put everything, make her question everything, about herself, about her family, about the world around her, everything surrounding her. And I knew that was going to happen. I didn't know to what extent, because again, I had no plan. I knew what that end would be, and the twists kept coming and just kept raising the stakes.
Yeah.
So and that's one of the things, and the characters around her also just propelled her forward and into that one huge transformative moment.
So I have a million more questions for you, but we also have some questions from some of our friends, students that wrote in and sent videos. So why don't we move to, Owen S. from 5th grade New York had a great question for us, and we're going to put it up for you guys right now.
When you're stuck in a part of the book and you don't know where to continue, you can't make it the end of the book because it's just not right. What do you do for brainstorming ideas?
Now, if that is not the quintessential question for an author, I think it's brilliant. So does anybody want to take a stab at that one first?
I'll jump in, because I sometimes get a lot of questions about, that idea of writer's block. You don't know how to proceed. And I've come up with like a very succinct way of how I handle it and how I suggest young writers handle it. And I tell them, just write garbage. Just write anything and everything that you could just think of. It doesn't matter how bad it is. Just throw it words on the page and move on. Because a lot of times we get stuck on the very next scene. But there's 2 scenes down that we really want to write, that we know what that's going to be all about. So just throw garbage on the page, because you're always going to revise. You're always going to rewrite. And so what I say is, you'll always come back, because you can always revise a poorly written page, but you can't revise a blank one. So if you leave it blank, there's nothing to change. But if you throw stuff on the page and it turns out to be garbage, sometimes you go back and you're like, not so bad. You can fix it with a few tweaks. Sometimes you got to throw the whole thing out and really shape it up. But by then you've written so much more of the story that you've learned what needs to be said. So my advice is write garbage.
Well, I'll jump in here, because I actually used a technique that I was not expecting, but I actually used the deck of Loteria cards. So when I would get stuck, I would shuffle the deck, and then I would see what card came up, and, you know, the arrows, las caras. And this actually did play a role in the story that I was not anticipating. But I would look at it and I would force myself to write the next scene using this in the next scene, in whatever capacity. There was a scorpion, a rose, a king, and all of these sort of became plot points in the story that took the story in a completely unexpected direction, but actually was a great way to break out of writer's block. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody else?
I'm going to have to get a Loteria deck now.
Yeah,
It sounds really good.
that is
Yeah.
really
Thank
cool.
you, Laura.
I just take a break. Like, that's all I can do sometimes, is just give it time and try to think. I really like to just think, like put on music that I like and that I think goes with the story, and then taking a walk or doing something around the house and just thinking about it.
Mhm.
I actually talked to my friends and asked them what would they do. Like,
Ooh,
if you
that's
were in
good.
this position, what would you do? As if I'm the character asking from advice.
I
I
love that.
Yeah, my friends are really generous with that, and then they end up thinking the character is them, and I don't know. It's kind of nice. Can be horrible too, but
Alex, what about you?
I also take a break. I definitely especially when I'm on deadline and I have the flexibility to just be working on the book. Sometimes I'll just decide hey, today or for the next hour, the next 3 hours, I'm not going to think about my book. I'm just going to watch a movie, or I'm just going to go for a walk or go to a museum. And I find the times when I'm just telling myself I'm not going to write, I'm itching to write. And so I definitely do that. But then sometimes being on deadline, I'm on deadline right now, you just kind of have to sit down and be I don't feel like it, but I have to do it. It's like any other job. And once you get past that barrier of I don't want to do this right now, stuff comes out and it'll be good or it won't. And like you said, it'll be garbage, but at least you have something. And I cannot stress the importance of that as someone who's had to rewrite 100 pages in the last 2 weeks. Just having something down is so much better than just realizing you didn't write anything all day. So yeah, that's what I do.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you, Owen, for that question. We have another question coming up. This is from James L., 5th grade, Olympia, Washington. Do you get angry with yourself because of your writing? And is it hard to forgive yourself sometimes? Yes, and yes. What about you guys?
yes and yes.
Anyone else?
I guess I get frustrated when what is coming out on the page doesn't look like what I want it to look like in my head, which I think is really common. So yes and yes.
Yeah, I think the frustration is definitely something that, I have to deal with, because I'll be on deadline or something. And I just know that I want to do so much and it's not flowing. So, but you have to realize that it's a process. It's something that sometimes you just can't, force. You just have to go with it and trust that you can always come back and make it better, and forgive yourself for that.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, anything else?
I don't really get angry with myself because I definitely get frustrated, like, oh, this should be better. Like, why can't you just sit down and write when, like, I definitely feel like when I was like a teenager and I had no agent and I had no publishing prospects, I had no book deals or anything, I was able to just sit at like 2 o'clock in the morning and write for hours and hours with this passion that like I don't know where it went. I'm definitely passionate now, but it does become more of a job. And so now that I have like these book deals and like all of this stuff, like I do get angry at myself that I'm not able to like harness that like passion that was just like writing for no reason except for the love of writing. But I also, when I get in that mood, I kind of remind myself that this is like what I've wanted for so long. And I remind myself how hard it was to get here. And I go to a bookstore and just kind of admire the books and think like, wow, I can't believe I wrote that, or I'm in the process of writing something like that. And that really helps. I think like having not only gratitude but also like giving yourself a break and saying like this is not an easy thing, and even if I'm like failing at it right now, like overall I've done something amazing. And I also think it helps to talk to people who aren't authors, because I found whenever I talk to someone, they're like, you wrote a book? Like, I can't even write like a 10-page essay or something like that. And then you're like, oh yeah, I wrote like a 500-page book or whatever it is. And I just feel like that kind of puts it into perspective. We're always so much in our heads, and it can be destructive because we're the only person we can blame is ourselves when we can't get something on the page. It's not like a group effort unless you like have a co-author. And so, yeah, I definitely try to get out of my head and also like be grateful that I even get to do this. That helps.
Well, and what you said, right? This is not easy. And I think we forget that, or I forget that, and then we just expect it to be more than it is without realizing that it's supposed to be challenging and we're supposed to work hard, and this it feels the way it's supposed to be feeling. So James, thank you for that question. I think we have another question from Lyra O, 7th grade, Yardley, Pennsylvania. Let's hear it.
Hi, my name is Lyra, and my question is, how do you get your ideas for your characters?
Oh my gosh, brilliant question. Who wants to go first? Anyone?
Okay, so I'll jump in. No one's speaking up. I always say, like, I'm always open to the universe. I never know where ideas are going to come from. My first book was based off my family history of my parents coming to the U.S. from Cuba during Operation Pedro Pan. A second book was based off of Pablo Picasso's painting. My new book, Concealed, the actual story was sparked by an actual event, without saying what the event was. It's an actual event, but the character popped in because I was at Starbucks, and this is not a plug for Starbucks, although I do love their coffee and I go to Starbucks quite a bit. It was just imagining a girl ordering a cup of coffee and forgetting how she's supposed to spell her name, because her name has changed so much. And it was something as simple as that, just being at Starbucks when they ask you what's your name to write on the coffee cup. So it's just a matter of being open to the world around you and letting inspiration kind of spark your imagination. That's how it works for me, at least.
I completely agree with that. Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
Oh, I was going to say I completely agree with that. With like the moment of that you knew about the Starbucks cup, that's how I get any book idea. It's just one little like vision in my mind. And it's not really the character, because it's kind of more of a circumstance. The character is so much harder for me to develop because you really have to dig in and think about them. And that's often the hardest part for me, because it has to be consistent. You have to have an arc and everything. And often like I only figure out the character when I'm done with the first draft. So it's really hard to go back. But I totally agree with that. Like it's a moment more than like coming up with a character for me.
Laura, Alejandra?
I am like struggling to figure out where exactly my characters come from. I think that I start out with, for Missing Oakley, I actually got the idea when I was 12, and I was with my sister at the ocean, and there was a sign that said like "Riptide, don't go in the water," and I was like, oh, what if she like went in the water? And I wrote like a little tiny story on a piece of notebook paper. So I had the main characters for a long time. In the next book I'm writing, I just wanted a group of characters who were friends to each other and who would feel like friends to the readers. So I guess I'm not exactly sure where they come from, but that's where those two came from in particular.
I agree a bit with all of you. I think there's really a moment, like an idea that sparks. And I think there are so many times in which that idea sparks and you don't take note of it. And then there's a lot of books we haven't written because we forgot that moment. I always think that like all the things I haven't written because I'm like I will remember, or maybe I'm in bed and I'm like, oh, that's great. I'll remember tomorrow. I'll write it tomorrow. And spoiler alert, you forget. You always forget. So yeah, it's just a moment or something that happens around you and you say, what if that? Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. Like I said, I had a million more questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. So thank you, everybody. Alejandra, Cristina, Alex, Laura. I am so grateful for this time to have spent with you. Thank you, everybody who tuned in to hear this wonderful panel, Middle and Marvelous. Stealing characters, middle grade characters that steal your heart. Thank you to the Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival. And I hope everybody check out these books. Check them out.
Thank you.
Thank you.